Hi, I'm Scott, and this is my stuff. I have this collection of synthesizers here. Some of them are fairly simple, some of them are a lot more complex. In this new series, I'm going to talk about each of these synthesizers, what they're good for, their strengths and weaknesses, how they're used, and I'm going to start with the simplest synthesizer I have, and then work my way up to the most complex one. Today, we start with the very simplest one, the Yamaha Reface CS. The Yamaha Reface CS is a virtual analog synthesizer. So that means it's a computer, but the computer program it runs is simulating an analog synthesizer. I bought this because it's small. You can run it on batteries or you can plug it in. You can take it anywhere. It has speakers built in. It's light, but it's solid and it sounds good. It does have mini keys, and normally I hate mini keys, but the mini keys on the Yamaha Reface series, and yes, it's a series, are actually fairly playable. I did a little bit of figuring out why, and it's because Yamaha has made the black keys fairly skinny so that you can actually get up and play the white keys up in between the black keys. A lot of other synthesizers, like my Roland JDXi, has the most unplayable keybed because the black keys are so tiny and close together that you can't play up in between the black keys. The Reface CS is a great first synthesizer, or for somebody that wants to learn synthesis. It's simple, one knob per function, lays out the very basics of synthesis for someone who may not be familiar with it. If you go from left to right, we have our pitch bend. Overall volume, we can, because you have a small keyboard, you can adjust the octave up and down 2 octaves. You also have a small looper, which I'll get to at the very end. LFO, which again we'll talk about in just a moment. Portamento, so it is a polyphonic, I believe 8-note polyphonic synthesizer. You can also switch it into monophonic. In this case, you get note stealing. So whichever the last note is played takes over. And you can also add in different levels of portamento, or slide between notes. It has 5 different oscillator types. The first is sawtooth, and it has the ability to do what they call a multi-saw, what Roland calls super saw. So for each oscillator type, you can select the type right here. You have a texture and a mod, and depending on what the type of oscillator is, the texture and mod selectors do different things. So for the multi-saw, the texture brings in a sub-oscillator, which you can hear come in. So it's basically another oscillator, another sawtooth oscillator 1 octave below. Sawtooth mod gives you more layers. So basically this is where you bring in your super saw. So you can hear additional copies of that sawtooth come in. If you notice, they are slightly detuned, so you get a little bit of a chorus effect, and that's what that super saw is. And of course, we have a low-pass filter with cutoff. So if it's all the way down, obviously you have almost nothing getting through. Even if you have the lowest note playing, you're getting nothing through. And if you bring some resonance in as well, that adds a little bit of a boost right at the cutoff frequency of the filter. It gives it a really distinctive sound. Okay, so that's the sawtooth. Next we have pulse. Now the pulse is a square wave. You have two oscillators. For this one, the texture detunes the second oscillator slightly. Now, as you can hear in there, this is not a high-end virtual analog. You do hear stepping, so there are limits in terms of some of the things such as detuning, envelopes, and so on. And because of that, you aren't going to want to sweep this, obviously, because of that quantization noise in there, but you can definitely select it to get the sound that you want. The mod control on the pulse adjusts the pulse width. So obviously when you change that pulse width so it's a very narrow pulse, you get a thin sound. Of course, if you tune your detuned second oscillator off to a key that doesn't match with what you're playing, you get horrible sounds like that. Next, we have oscillator sync. This is a sine wave where the second oscillator is synced to the first oscillator. So as you detune the second oscillator, it's going to naturally drift away from the frequency of the first. However, at the end of each cycle of the first waveform, it resets that second oscillator, even though it may not be completely finished playing its waveform. On this one, the texture adjusts the pitch and tone of the second oscillator. The mod changes the pitch of the oscillator too. Next we have ring modulation, where the two oscillators are multiplied against each other. The texture is the pitch of the first oscillator, the mod is the pitch of the second oscillator. And as you can hear, you can get some crazy harmonics when that happens. Lastly, the Reface CS can also do FM. In FM mode, oscillator 2 modulates oscillator 1. Now it is just a two oscillator or two operator algorithm. So in texture is the amount of modulation, and modulation, it says, is the pitch of oscillator 2, but to me it actually sounds like the amount of feedback on oscillator 2. But here you have a listen. So you start with a simple sine wave because FM works with sine waves. And there you get the very metallic sounding FM sounds. But the mod, while it says altering the pitch of oscillator 2, just sounds like it brings in feedback, which generally brings in kind of a white noise. Next, we have a standard ADSR attack, decay, sustain, release envelope generator. What it affects is adjustable between the amplitude or the filter or anywhere in between. So if we start with amplitude, we can put a little bit of release on. Or you can make it very short. You can adjust the... And then if we put it on the filter, or we can put it somewhere in between. And the last thing the sound gets to before you actually hear it are the effects. We have 4 different types of effects. You can adjust the depth and rate of each. So we start with delay. We have a phaser. A chorus flanger. And distortion. Next, we also have an LFO, low frequency oscillator. This can be assigned to either the amplitude, filter, pitch, or oscillator, and we have a depth and speed for each. So if we assign it to the amplitude, and the LFO does reach up into the audio frequencies. And filter. Or pitch. And lastly, oscillator. And what the oscillator setting on the LFO does depends on what oscillator type we have set. Lastly, we have a looper. Now this is a very simple phrase looper. It's not all that useful. It can't be used to do pattern. You can't edit it. It's basically not much more than a looper pedal, though it records MIDI rather than sound. So you can actually record pitch bends and so on or filter sweeps as part of the loop, and it will actually play that back. So we'll start by clearing it, and then we can adjust our tempo and then start with record. And it will start recording as soon as I play. I do have it set to quantize to a 16th notes. So you can't actually save any of the patterns. You can play, or it's more or less used as a simple arpeggiator. Now the Reface CS is a fairly simple synthesizer. It doesn't have any patch memory, so once you've come up with a sound, you kind of got to maybe take a picture of the sliders to try to remember how you came up with that sound. However, there is another option. If we go to Soundmondo on Yamaha, with our Reface connected via USB, you can see it shows connected up here, it's green. Then we can say browse by instrument, and we'll click on our Reface CS. Now we can look at all these different sounds that people have created. Ooh, Blade Runner intro, let's click on that one. Now that it's loaded, all we have to do is play it on the synthesizer. Didn't like that one? Well, how about a classic rock organ? And if we want, we can create our own sounds and then upload them to the Soundmondo site and share them with everyone else. If you want, you can create your own private library. So while the CS doesn't have the ability to save patches, you can actually save them in your own private area in the Soundmondo website. So that's it. That's the very first one, my Reface CS. That's the simplest synthesizer I own. If you want to see the next one, don't forget to click like and subscribe down below and click that little bell so you'll get notified the next time I post one of these videos. Thanks for watching.